What we are trying to do with the Legal Accountability Project is centralize and democratize information about both judges with a history of misconduct and good judges you should apply to. It's a way to ensure that as many law students as possible have as much info about as many judges as possible. And this is what I wish I had when I was a law student.
Welcome to Women We Should Know with international speaker, mindset reset mentor, author, and your host, Leslie Michaels. With audacious honesty and candor, the Women We Should Know podcast presents the wisdom and life-empowering insights of women who are the embodiments of innovation and social evolution. Please join Leslie as she shares potent conversations that will inspire your personal and professional evolutions. Welcome back to Women We Should Know, my favorite part of every day, when I get to come here and sit in this chair, speak with amazing women, and bring those stories and those inspirations to each of you. It is always insightful, and I learn something each time, and I trust that you do as well. We're going to have a great conversation for you today, and when we are finished, you be sure and go to YouTube, watch the whole thing, hit subscribe, hit like, share it with a friend, because we want these women who we have on this show, we want their names to become household names. These are women who are doing important things in our world. So let's all reach out and support them collectively. You think? Today, we have Aliza Shatzman, and she is the president and co-founder of the Legal Accountability Project, a nonprofit aimed at ensuring that as many law clerks as possible have positive clerkship experiences, while extending support and resources to those who do not. Now, that is something worth fighting for. We'll get into it in a minute, but I bet a lot of these people who do not have pleasant experiences are female, but that's my bias speaking. Aliza earned her BA from Williams College and her JD from Washington University School of Law in St. Louis. After law school, Aliza clerked in D.C. Superior Court during the 2019-2020 term. In March 2022, Aliza submitted written testimony for a House Judiciary, I can say that word, subcommittee hearing about the lack of workplace protections in the federal judiciary, detailing her personal experience with gender discrimination. Okay, we know a little about that, don't we, women? Also, gender harassment. And here's one we all know as well, retaliation by a former DC judge. Aliza now writes and speaks regularly about judicial accountability. She has been published in numerous forums, including the UCLA Journal of Gender and Law, the NYU Journal of Legislation and Public Policy, Above the Law, Law 360, Slate, Ms. Magazine, oh, one of my oldie goldie favorites, and Balls and Strikes. Well, this woman has been up to a lot, and she's younger than a lot of us. So it gives us hope of what's coming in the future. So without further ado, Aliza, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Well, you're out there making waves.
Yep. Most days, every day, yeah.
Good on you, as they say in New Zealand. We need women out there making more noise and more waves, especially now. So, speaking of women, could you tell us how you are impacting the lives of women in business, in society, or as a whole?
Sure. So the nonprofit that I recently co-founded with a law school classmate is called the Legal Accountability Project. And as you said, we're basically trying to protect law clerks from workplace mistreatment. As you mentioned, a lot of the law clerks facing mistreatment, gender discrimination, harassment, and retaliation are women. So
Mhm.
I am seeking to ensure that every young attorney, particularly every young woman who wants to pursue a career in law, can pursue the career she loves in a workplace free from discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. Because what we see is today's young attorneys, today's law clerks, are tomorrow's big law partners, federal public defenders, prosecutors, law professors, and judges. And we have a less diverse legal profession because of
Mhm.
judicial misconduct, and
Mhm.
ultimately a less diverse bench because of
Mm.
judicial misconduct.
Absolutely. Certainly a less diverse bench. As you are working with this, and I know you just formed this organization and you are writing and you are getting out there in the world and talking about this. Not everyone, maybe not a lot of our listeners are reading the UCLA Journal of Law and Gender or the NYU Journal of Legislation and Public Policy. How are you putting your voice out there in a way that, number one, young attorneys can find you easily? It's known that you are out there.
Yep. As you said, not everybody's reading law journal articles, and my UCLA article is 100 pages. So I don't expect people outside the legal profession to read it. I'm very active on social media, Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook. Basically out there posting every day about the work that I'm doing and the issues I think are important, talking about how the Legal Accountability Project's resources will transform the clerkship landscape, and also sharing my personal story. I think it's really important that founders and advocates are advocating based on their personal experiences. I think these are challenging issues. These are abstract issues like what is judicial accountability? What is gender discrimination and harassment? So putting my personal face and personal story on those issues is really important. And one of the things my nonprofit's going to be doing in the fall is visiting a lot of law school campuses where I'll be sharing my personal story to underscore the scope of the problem and then proposing solutions, including our resources and raising issues like the Judiciary Accountability Act, which would extend Title VII to the judiciary, which would finally impose some judicial accountability on misbehaving judges and help to protect law clerks. So I really think that sharing my personal story is important.
Absolutely. And of course, your generation is much more adept at social media than mine is, but I'm picking it up. I have to ask you because of the big wave that just happened. I am in love with this woman, Olivia Juliana. Are you taking your project into the TikTok world to let women and men know about what it is that you are doing?
So we're definitely thinking about it. My co-founder, his name is Matt Goodman. He is more tech savvy than I am. So he edits and releases all our videos. He created our website. He's a podcaster. So we've released some episodes of that. We're thinking about it. I mean, I think releasing videos is going to be an important aspect of our work. Just we've released 2 or 3 so far. I've talked about my personal story, a couple issues of importance to us. Definitely reaching the younger generation through social media, including TikTok, is important. So we're talking about it. Right now, it's a 2-person show, myself and Matt, and we have an intern who's helpful, but we only have so much bandwidth each day.
I understand that. I understand that. I'm always trying to expand my team. Just about the time I get it expanded, oh my gosh, I'm behind again. Now, you mentioned something that I would love for you to expand on. What is judiciary accountability? I'm guessing that we may even have a couple of young lawyers or law students out there who really don't even know what that encompasses.
Yeah. So right now, the federal judiciary is exempt from Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That means that judiciary employees, including law clerks and federal public defenders, cannot sue their harassers and seek damages for harms done to their lives, careers, and future earning potential. So, the Judiciary Accountability Act is an excellent piece of legislation that was proposed about a year ago in July 2021. And it is currently under review by the House and Senate Judiciary Committees. And I got engaged on this issue by submitting written testimony for a House Judiciary hearing. So the JIA would extend Title VII, which is enormously important. It would also amend Title 28 of the US Code to redefine judicial misconduct to include discrimination and retaliation. And it would also specify that misbehaving judges, when they retire or resign to try to avoid a misconduct investigation, that investigation can continue. And it would impose some data collection requirements on the judiciary about the outcomes of their judicial misconduct complaints, the lack of diversity in law clerk and federal public defender hiring. So it's enormously important. And before this happened to me, I was not fully aware that the judiciary is exempt from Title VII. That makes it distinct from the other two branches of Congress. The other two branches of government, Congress and the executive branch, which are protected under Title VII as of 1995. So this has been a long time coming. The judiciary just notoriously refuses to be regulated, and I think it's enormously important. Extending Title VII to law clerks won't fix everything. It's just the first step toward a much larger overhaul of our judicial accountability mechanisms, but it's important.
Well, keep pitching, because our judiciary is on a daily basis proving just how much they need an overhaul.
Absolutely. And I think it's also a question of what is a female litigant to think if they are appearing before a judge in a Title VII case where they are saying, I was harassed, discriminated against, and retaliated against in the workplace, and yet the judge presiding over my case is not subject to Title VII, may have committed misconduct themselves. I think it's a real issue. It makes people lose faith in the judiciary to fully realize that they are exempt from the laws they enforce. I think by exempting the judiciary from Title VII, it sends a message to misbehaving judges: you are above the laws you enforce.
And it is a clear and unequivocal statement of the existence of the patriarchy dominating the judicial.
Absolutely. Yes.
Because if men are making the laws and men are committing the acts and men are sitting on the bench for the cases, it is a purely patriarchal orchestration of theater. It's not an actual judicial recourse, or it hasn't been up until now.
That's correct. I agree. But I should also say that female judges are not exempt from these problematic behaviors. There are definitely female judges who mistreat their clerks. Sometimes it's different in different ways from the way male judges do it. But I think there are more judges who are mistreating their clerks than the legal profession would care to admit.
I'm sure. Now, this is kind of taking you off on the side path, but I'm known for that. How do you see the trickle down of that? If clerks or if judges can mistreat their clerks, then how does that impact their sense of their own power base in terms of defendants, or in terms of the way they interact with the bodies of Congress, as it were?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think we talked a minute ago about losing faith in the judiciary. I think the same judges who are mistreating their clerks are also mistreating litigants. That includes defendants. I think some of the judges who are, committing gender discrimination and harassment act in the same negative ways toward defendants. They're not treating them with respect. And when you think about a defendant, particularly somebody whose liberty is being taken away, I mean, they are in an even lesser position to complain about that mistreatment than a law clerk is. And law clerks are not in a good bargaining position either. I think the issue with the judiciary interacting with other branches of government is interesting because the judiciary keeps claiming that they are unique, judicial supremacy. We are above regulation. We do not want oversight from Congress, let alone from the executive branch. I think that's ridiculous.
Well, they are above the law, but they are making rulings regarding the law. It's the ultimate hypocrisy.
And I think that's why some people think that change in the judiciary will be so slow, is because the people deciding whether to make these changes are right now trying to self-regulate or allegedly self-regulating. They're doing a terrible job. I mean, right now, judges preside over judicial misconduct investigations into their colleagues. Judges preside over internal employee dispute resolution complaints, where law clerks are trying to get away from their misbehaving supervisors, which leads to no punishment, no regulation, and really not impartial investigations or outcomes for clerks.
Exactly. Simply put, it's like asking senators to vote for term limits and to put themselves out of a job. Not happening. It's just not happening.
Yep.
Speak to our listeners about the Legal Accountability Project's specific initiatives.
Sure. So we are working on two major initiatives in collaboration with law schools beginning this fall. And I should probably back up and talk a little bit about clerkships, what they are and how you get them. Yeah. So law clerks are young attorneys, fresh out of law school, maybe 1 or 2 years work experience, but they are the youngest and newest members of our profession. And they opt for a pay cut, and they might move to some faraway place for a year or two to work for and learn from a judge, with the belief that this will create a lifelong mentor-mentee relationship. The judge will support the clerk throughout their career, serve as a reference. And that's the best of circumstances. And that's what lots of ink is spilled each year talking about. What I'm talking about is the worst of circumstances, when these are particularly unregulated and dangerous work environments that are rife with harassment. A judicial chambers is a judge who has life tenure or the perception of life tenure, a couple clerks, and maybe a judicial assistant. They work long hours behind locked doors, and there is no oversight by chief judges over judges' dealings with clerks, period, which makes it enormously difficult for law clerks to speak up in the face of workplace mistreatment. So the legal community puts an enormous premium on clerkships. It's considered the checkbox for your next step in the profession. And unfortunately, there is no way for law students to know to look out for judges with a history of misconduct. Some law schools maintain some information about judges with a history of misconduct. They are notorious for not warning law students about these judges. And even if they warn their own students, very few law schools maintain any info. So if you are in the majority of the law schools that do not do any sort of post-clerkship survey or check in with clerks after their clerkship has ended, you will unwittingly walk into a hostile work environment. What we are trying to do with the Legal Accountability Project is centralize and democratize information about both judges with a history of misconduct and good judges you should apply to. It's a way to ensure that as many law students as possible have as much info about as many judges as possible when they apply for clerkships.
That's brilliant, to also have the judges that they do want to pursue, to not just be the naysayers in the room.
Absolutely. There are lots of things that you as a law student would want to know before deciding to clerk. You'd want to know, does the judge give me courtroom experience because I want to be a prosecutor or a public defender? Does he give me writing experience because I want to be an appellate attorney? How does he provide feedback on my work? He or she provide feedback on my work. There are all kinds of things you'd want to know that don't speak to misconduct, but are important. So our database questions will elucidate information about all those issues and more. And what we are doing is trying to get as many law schools to partner with us this year as possible, with the intent that eventually every law school will partner with us. And law clerk alumni will create an account with us and write a report anonymously about their judge and their clerkship, good, bad, medium. We want to hear everything. And if you are a law student at one of the participating institutions, you can read all the reports about judges, not just your alumni's reports, but information about all of the judges, all of the law clerk alumni who've reported into the database. And yeah, I think it's an enormously valuable resource. I mean, this is what I wish I had when I was a law student applying for clerkships. So.
Exactly. And that's where I wanted to go, is to your story, because this was the experience that propelled you and compelled you to move in the direction that you are now.
Yes. So I served as a law clerk in DC Superior Court during the 2019 to 2020 term. I aspired to be a homicide prosecutor in the DC U.S. Attorney's Office, and I knew that DC AUSAs appeared before DC Superior Court judges. I went into the
What
clerkship.
did that just mean that you just said?
An AUSA is an assistant U.S. attorney. Those are the federal prosecutors in Washington, D.C. That U.S. Attorney's Office is unique in that they deal with cases on both local issues, because D.C. is not a state, and federal issues. So they interact with both the D.C. Superior Courthouse and the D.C. District Courthouse. So
thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
Now you can go forward.
So that is where I just desperately wanted to work. I plotted like 3 years of law school around this goal. I interned at 4 different Justice Department offices. I was ready to go. And I thought this would create a lifelong mentor-mentee relationship with the judge for whom I clerked. Unfortunately, that did not happen. Beginning like just weeks into the clerkship, the judge for whom I clerked began to harass me, discriminate against me based on my gender. He would kick me out of the courtroom and tell me I made him uncomfortable, and he just felt more comfortable with my male co-clerk. Told me I was aggressive and nasty and a disappointment. The day I found out I passed the DC bar exam, so big day in my life, he called me into his inner chambers, got in my face, and said, "You're bossy. And I know bossy because my wife is bossy." And I was just devastated. I mean, I was a couple months into my legal career. This was my first job. This judge seemed to be singling me out for mistreatment. I cried myself to sleep at night. I wanted to be reassigned to a different judge, but my workplace didn't have an employee dispute resolution plan that might have enabled that to happen. And various individuals, lots of women, advised me to stick it out because I needed my 1 year of legal experience to be eligible to apply to become a prosecutor. So we eventually transitioned to remote work during the pandemic. I moved back to Philly to stay with my parents. The judge basically ignored me for 6 weeks before he called me up in late April of 2020 and told me he was ending my clerkship early because I made him uncomfortable and lacked respect for him. And he didn't want to get into it. Then he hung up on me. So I called DC Courts HR, and they told me there was nothing they could do because HR doesn't regulate judges, and that judges and law clerks have a unique relationship. And then they asked me, didn't I know that I was an at-will employee? So it took me about a year to get back on my feet. After that, I eventually secured my dream job in the DC U.S. Attorney's Office as a special assistant U.S. attorney. I moved back to DC in July of 2021, and I was 2 weeks into training at the DC U.S. Attorney's Office. I'd already started working there when I was told the judge had made negative statements about me during my background investigation, that I wouldn't be able to obtain a security clearance, and that my job offer was being revoked. A couple days later, I was offered a different interview for a different position with the office, and that offer was also revoked based on the judge's same negative reference. At this point, I was 2 years into my legal career, and this judge seemed to just have enormous and limitless power to destroy my career and ruin my reputation. So that's when I filed a judicial complaint with the DC Commission on Judicial Disabilities and Tenure. That's the regulatory body for DC judges. And then I hired attorneys, and in the summer and fall of 2021, participated in the investigation into the now former judge. And we were partway through the investigation when I found out the judge was on administrative leave pending an investigation into other misconduct at the time he'd filed the negative reference about me. But the USAO, the U.S. Attorney's Office, was not alerted of this. And I was basically blackballed from what I thought was my dream job.
So based on the fact that I am so sorry you went through this, and I'm glad that you are one of the resilient ones who isn't going to step back. Now, let me go back because I have questions. Based on the fact that the fact that this judge was on administrative leave pending other complaints at the time that he blacklisted you for your job, could you not use that to go back and reapply and use that as evidence to the fact that it was not about you, but his incompetence?
So that's a complicated question because it relies on a couple issues. The first one is references in DC and in many other states. There is a qualified opinion privilege, meaning that if the judge can say, well, these are my opinions, it's harder to challenge the reference. Also, as we mentioned, the judiciary is exempt from Title VII. Title VII also deals with retaliation. So it would be enormously difficult to file that sort of complaint. In January of 2022, pursuant to the terms of our private settlement agreement, so separate from the judiciary, my attorneys and his worked out a settlement agreement. He did issue a clarifying statement to the USAO, addressing some but not all of his outrageous claims about me. But by then, the damage had been done. And I'm definitely blackballed from that U.S. Attorney's office. I will never work there. I mean, they can't unsee what was alleged about me in that negative reference. And I think this is an issue that more people should talk about, some of these negative retaliatory references and the fact that, you know, people can make hiring decisions based on whatever they want. And this is a decision that was made about me. And it's really unfortunate because I love what I'm doing now. It galvanizes me and gets me up in the morning. But, you know, there are still days when I just remember how much I wanted to be a prosecutor. I watch a TV show where there are prosecutors, or I listen to a podcast where a prosecutor is being interviewed, and it makes me a little sad.
Yes, of course. If you were to, well, you are, because I'm going to ask you to do it now. For the women listening, I don't know whether they be longtime attorneys who have probably learned to work the system, or younger attorneys, or law school students. What are the top 3 things you would tell a female in any of these positions in order to fortify her dreams, to be able to fulfill those dreams and not fall into one of the sand pits?
You know, I think if you are someone facing mistreatment, it's about documenting what happened to you, confiding in people, taking notes. And then it's also about reporting the mistreatment. I think this is a challenging issue. People sometimes ask me, what about resources for people who are mistreated and don't want to report? And I have complex feelings about that. If you are someone who experiences mistreatment and you don't report, the judge who harassed you will harass other clerks as well.
Yes.
So it's about stopping the cycle of abuse, is about documenting our experiences and reporting what happened to us. So I think that's what I would say to young attorneys and older attorneys who have faced mistreatment, is you need to document it, you need to report it. I think the other issue for older attorneys who, as you mentioned, I think, yes, have worked the system, and definitely something I see is some women climb the ladder of success and then kind of kick it down behind them. It's about supporting the next generation of professional women. And definitely in my story, I experienced some women not supporting other women types of challenges. It's really about empowering other people to bring their full selves to work. So, yeah.
You said 2 things just then that I want to unpack.
Yep.
Women climbing the ladder and then kicking it down behind them. In recent years, the increased percentage of woman-to-woman incivility in all levels of the business and professional arena has been reported everywhere from Forbes to Harvard Business Review. It is a real and true epidemic and issue. What do you say to younger women who are experiencing this, who are having this inflicted upon them?
I mean, first, I tell them that they are not alone, and that if someone is mistreating you, if someone is harassing you, it's a statement about their poor character, not about yours. The most common fact pattern when law clerks reach out to me, like LinkedIn or Twitter DMs or emails to confide in me, is they give me the same story. My judge says that I am a poor performer. I'm not dedicated to the clerkship, but he won't give specifics. That is just a smokescreen of ridiculousness when, I mean, yeah, it says everything about the harasser's poor character, and it says nothing about you.
Is there a way to compel those judges to cite specifics? Or are they going to avoid that so that they don't put themselves in a compromised position based on the fact that it's all a bunch of bullshit anyway?
Good question. I mean, right now there really is no way to compel them. As we talked about, judges are really above the laws they enforce, and there are really no enforced workplace protections in the judicial workplace. I think there could be rules about that.
So there's no cultural motivation or impetus within the judiciary.
No, absolutely not. The culture in the judiciary is one of protecting your brothers and sisters in robes at all costs. And the most outrageous thing, and I talk to a lot of judges, and most of them are very supportive of what I do, but the most outrageous thing I heard was from a female judge who said, things will never change. You're spinning your wheels. I will protect my harassment committing colleagues till the bitter end. That was bad, but there is definitely, that is the culture. And when I talk to judges, it's really about having those difficult conversations with your judiciary colleagues. When you see them mistreating a law clerk, mistreating a litigant, there are some bar rules, I know there are in DC, about reporting on your judges, judiciary colleagues' poor health or misconduct. They're really not enforced. It's about changing the culture. It's enormously important. And I mean, I've kind of stepped back from the formal practice of law to launch and lead this nonprofit, but we really need more voices speaking out forcefully for change. And it can't just be people who've stepped back from the practice of law. It needs to be people who are in the law. It needs to be people who interact with these judges every day, who will tell them to stop, tell them to act differently. Unfortunately, there are just very few individuals in this space, let alone any other nonprofits in this space, talking about these issues, working on them full time. I mean, we are addressing an enormous unmet need. And when I talk to law schools, you know, many understand that we're addressing the unmet needs, some do not, but all the law students I talk to, and I talk to student leaders every day, and they get it. They get it. At 50 plus law schools that we're visiting this year, they understand that these are enormous and unmet challenges. So yes, there are lots of potential partnerships out there. I think the issue is that in this space right now, there are some organizations talking about diversity on the bench or diversity in the clerkship workplace. Those are important issues, but they cannot be decoupled from a discussion about judicial misconduct, judicial accountability, protecting law clerks from harassment. And my biggest issue with some of the organizations in the space right now is that I don't think increasing diversity on the bench, I don't think increasing diversity in chambers will solve every issue. And what law clerks express to me is a tokenism fear that if they are the lone woman, LGBTQ, non-white person in chambers, they'll just be subjected to increased victimization. Who wants that? Nobody. So it's really, the conversation is not going in the correct direction always. So out there sharing my story and trying to change the direction of the conversation.
Good for you. Yes, I have always maintained that in the diversity, inclusion, equity equation, it must be led by inclusion.
Definitely.
Instead of diversity. Because diversity will not bring inclusion. Inclusion will bring diversity.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, now unpacking one more thing. You spoke of some women are ready to speak out, they're ready to report, and then there are those who want to be able to report without self-identifying, and that that's not always a comfortable position, not necessarily even a fair position. Women who want to receive the benefit of support and won't speak up for themselves, how do you attempt to help them understand that by not speaking up for themselves, they are complicitly condemning all other women?
Yes, this is an enormously important issue, and one my co-founder and I have been addressing a lot more in the past couple of days. I would say a couple of things about that. The first thing is, both in our initiatives at the Legal Accountability Project and in the Judiciary Accountability Act, there are going to be ways to report anonymously. into our database. Law clerks will be reporting anonymously. They have an option to provide their names, but we assume many won't, and that's fine. In the Judiciary Accountability Act, one of the additional things legislation does is creates a confidential reporting system for law clerks who want to report on their experience but aren't ready to file a formal complaint. And when I speak with judiciary officials, I mean, some say that law clerks can always report to us confidentially. Unfortunately, anecdotally, what law clerks tell me is what they think is confidential doesn't always stay that way.
Right.
And there are challenges about what is mandatory reporting once a judiciary official hears about misconduct and what is not. So they're complex issues. In terms of the larger question about not reporting, this is something that's enormously difficult for me, but I think it's an important issue to talk about. And I think it's one the Legal Accountability Project is going to have to answer increasingly. I really feel strongly that for law clerks who don't report, like I said earlier, the judges who harass them will harass other clerks, and this creates a cycle of abuse.
Yes.
Just because, I mean, judges will continue harassing, and also it sends a message in chambers if the judge is mistreating clerks that is okay. So in addition to the law clerk who faces mistreatment, the other clerks might see that as okay behavior, especially once you've climbed the ranks of success. And so it perpetuates cycle abuse in multiple different ways.
Yes.
I think it's really important. In my story, the judge who harassed me had harassed other clerks and they did not report. And if they had, perhaps what happened to me wouldn't have happened. So while I definitely respect everyone's right to report or not report as they see fit, and some folks have said to me, you know, Aliza, just because you reported, just because you spoke publicly, that's not for everybody. You know, you just need to think of the larger picture here. And that, do you want what happened to you to happen to other people? I hope you don't. I certainly don't.
What is something that a majority of people out there in the law profession, maybe some who even aren't in the law profession, can do on a consistent basis to support this initiative that you are spearheading for the benefit of untold thousands of individuals?
So, I mean, they can go to legalaccountabilityproject.org and learn more, donate to us, sign up for our mailing list, support us in various ways, and tell other people to support us as well. I mean, we are a nonprofit, so we are actively raising money, and that's important. So
always with nonprofits.
I mean, we hope to expand our initiatives. We're working on the database and a workplace assessment of the judiciary now, but we hope to ultimately have an employment attorney database to connect mistreated law clerks with attorneys who can help, and various other initiatives. Those take money, so we need support. But it's also about kind of reframing the public conversation about these issues and believing, affirming, and supporting clerks, encouraging everybody to bring their full selves to work every day. I was told repeatedly that I was aggressive and bossy, and those are things that we tell assertive women, but we don't tell men. And I know that there are attorneys right now, both women and men, who still use those gender stereotypes in daily life, and they should stop. I mean, it's really about encouraging everybody to bring their full selves to work every day. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is,
one of the things that I really appreciate about you building this initiative, about you telling your story, and being very candid about the heartbreaking loss that brought you to this place is, well, there are several things I appreciate. I appreciate your resilience in turning it around and turning it into a positive for other women. But the other thing that I really appreciate about you getting out here and sending me a long email nominating yourself to come on this podcast, I have to tell you, Aliza, I loved that.
Oh God.
I have unending respect for audacious women with chops. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that I have never thought about it. And I've been out here in the feminist trenches for, well, let's just leave it at over 40 years. That's good enough. I had never thought about law clerks. I had never thought, I know I've heard, but I had never thought about the immunity of the justices. It's like a pass card to go out and treat anyone you want with any disregard, incivility, or and I'm sure in many cases, sexual impropriety that you would choose. And I appreciate you bringing this conversation to our listeners. Now, for you out there listening, had you ever thought of this before? Had you thought about law clerks? Have you encountered a law clerk? Have you encountered a judge? Go to the YouTube and leave comments. Let's have a conversation about this. This is one of those hidden levels of abuse that, yes, some men, but predominantly women have been going through and are continuing to go through. Let's have a conversation. Let's not let this stay in the dark corners. Let's stand up and reach out to our sisters of our age and our little sisters like Aliza, who are out there doing something fierce and doing something important for all women. Okay? I'm going to be checking for your comments and I will get back with you. So let's get this conversation going. And Aliza may jump in there and comment and have more to share with you herself. But thank you so much. I have deep respect for what you are doing and where you are going. And please keep us up to date and keep us apprised of how we here at Women We Should Know can continue to support these efforts. I do trust that each one of you got something precious and valuable out of this conversation today. I encourage you to revisit whatever it was. Keep it alive in you. And as you do go forward with your day, I'd like to remind you, you are stronger and wiser than you know.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We hope you received inspiration for expanding your own social innovation and influence. Help us inspire others by sharing this episode and leaving your comments over at lesliemichaels.com/podcast. For more tips, insights, and support in creating a fully audacious, professional, and personal lifestyle you love, visit our Women We Should Know community on Facebook.